I still remember the first time she said the word cancer, the way her voice cracked, the way her hands trembled, the way her eyes filled with the kind of fear that makes you forget to breathe. It was 2 years into our relationship, the point where you think you know everything about a person, the point where love feels safe. But that night, everything shifted. We were sitting in the kitchen, the air thick with the smell of coffee and rain. She stared at her phone for a long time, silent. Then she whispered, "I got my results." I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, shaking her head, tears already falling. "It's bad," she said. "It's really bad." I froze. Every cell in my body screamed to do something, to fix it, to help. But there's no handbook for the moment the person you love tells you they're dying. She slid her phone across the table. On the screen, there was an email from a doctor, a name I didn't recognize, with words that blurred together my panic. Stage 3, immediate treatment recommended. She broke down before I could even read it all. I held her. She sobbed into my chest, whispering, "Please don't leave me. I can't do this alone." And in that instant, I swore to myself that I wouldn't. I quit smoking that night because she said she couldn't stand the smell anymore. I stopped drinking, started researching every kind of treatment, every holistic therapy, every experimental trial. I begged her to let me go with her to the hospital, but she always refused. "It's too painful," she said. "I can't handle seeing you there, watching me fall apart." So I waited. I waited for updates, for photos, for messages from her family. Sometimes she'd send me pictures of IVs, hospital beds, her wrists with the little white bracelet. Other times, she'd disappear for days, only to return with long, poetic texts about how she felt like she was already halfway gone. And God, I believed her. Every word. I sold my car so I could help her pay for her treatments. She didn't ask. She just cried when I offered, said she didn't want to burden me, and that made me want to help her even more. I took extra shifts at work. I stopped seeing my friends because she said she needed me emotionally available. I built my entire life around her pain. The thing about loving someone who's dying is that you start dying with them, slowly, quietly, piece by piece. I stopped sleeping. I lost weight. I dreamed about hospital corridors and blood tests. I counted the days between her chemo sessions, terrified that one morning I'd wake up to a message saying she was gone. But she didn't die. Weeks turned into months, and somehow she stayed exactly the same. Still pale, still fragile, still sick, but never worse. She always said, "The doctors are surprised I'm holding on this long." She called me her miracle, and I believed her, until the night she collapsed. It was past midnight when she texted me, "I can't breathe. I think it's happening." I jumped out of bed, heart pounding, called an ambulance, and raced to her apartment. When I got there, her door was unlocked, the lights dimmed, and she was lying on the floor, gasping, her skin slick with sweat. I knelt beside her, shaking. "Hold on," I called for help. She grabbed my hand, eyes wide. "No hospitals," she whispered. "Please, not again." I didn't know what to do. I just held her as she cried, whispering how scared she was, how much she loved me, how she didn't want to go. When the paramedics finally came, she screamed at them, clawing at me, shouting that she wanted me to help, not them. They took her anyway. I followed the ambulance, praying, crying, begging whatever God still listened to save her. But when I got to the hospital, they told me she wasn't there. I showed them her name, her photo, begged them to check again. But there was no record of her arriving, no ambulance report, no patient by that name. I called her phone, no answer. I called every hospital in the area, nothing. She was gone. For 2 days, I barely slept. I called her family, her friends, anyone who might know where she was. Everyone said the same thing. "We haven't heard from her in weeks." Then, on the 3rd day, she texted me, "I'm okay. Please don't be mad. I just needed to get away. The doctors say the stress is making it worse. I'm in a clinic out of town. No phones allowed. I love you." And just like that, she vanished again. At first, I was relieved. Then I was angry. then confused. The message didn't sound like her. I looked closer at the photo she'd sent weeks earlier, her hospital wristband. I zoomed in. The date on it was almost a year old. My hands went numb. I opened the email from the doctor she'd shown me that first night and checked the domain. It wasn't a hospital address. It was a Gmail. That's when the panic began to twist into something else. Dread. I went through everything, the photos, the messages, the receipts, the names of the clinics, the pills she said she was taking. None of them existed. Not one. And then I found something buried deep in her old Instagram, a tag photo from years ago. Her, standing next to another man, smiling. The caption, "My angel, thank you for saving me through chemo." Different city, different year, different man. Same story. My hands shook so hard I dropped my phone. Because it hit me then. She wasn't sick. She never was. She was addicted to sympathy, to rescue, to control. And I wasn't her first cure. The first few hours after I found that photo were just static. I couldn't think, couldn't feel. I sat on the kitchen floor with my laptop open, surrounded by every trace of her life that I still had. Old messages, screenshots, bits of paper where she'd written appointments and medication names. For a while, I stared at them the same way a detective stares at the scene of murder, knowing the victim was his own sanity. Because that's what it felt like she hadn't stolen my money or my trust. She'd murdered my reality and left me sitting inside the outline of the person I used to be. I started with the doctor's email. I copied the address into the search bar, looked for any sign it was legitimate. Nothing. It didn't belong to a hospital or even a clinic. Just a free email with a name that didn't exist anywhere in medical records. The attachment she'd shown me months ago, the report that said stage 3 carcinoma, was a simple Word document. No signature, no logo, no ID number. Just words. Cold, typed, believable words. Then I checked the receipts, the ones she'd shown me for her treatments. I kept them all because she said it helped her keep track of the journey. But none of them had addresses or patient names. They were generic. Some were even from pharmacies that didn't exist anymore. I found one that was supposedly from a specialist center, the logo printed on top. And when I searched it, the same design appeared on a completely different website, a free template site for downloadable invoices. That's when the shaking started. Not anger. Not yet. Just disbelief so deep it became physical. For hours, I kept scrolling through our old conversations. I wanted to find something, anything, that would prove I was wrong, that maybe there was a mix-up, a misunderstanding, something human in all this madness. But every message, every tear, every whispered, "I'm dying, but I'm fighting for you," was another nail in the coffin of what I thought was love. Then I opened the oldest folder in her cloud drive, the one she'd once let me access to help with her paperwork. I don't even know why I remembered the password. Maybe because she'd used my birthday. Inside were photos, dozens of them, of her lying in hospital beds, for lines taped to her arms. But the file names, they were dated long before we even met. And in the corner of some, if you looked closely enough, you could see tiny printed words on the blankets. Different hospitals, different cities. And then I saw him, the man from that old Instagram post, the one who'd saved her through chemo. His face was there in a few photos too, blurred in the background, smiling. The pattern started forming like a disease spreading under glass. She'd done it before, maybe more than once. Every few years, a new city, a new man, a new story. Each time, she became the victim of something that could never be proven or disproven, an illness, an accident, a tragedy, something that demanded devotion, silence, and guilt. And each time, she drained them, their love, their money, their time, until they were hollow enough to leave behind. That's when I realized something that made my stomach twist. She didn't just lie about being sick. She needed to be sick, because sickness made her the center of the world. It made her untouchable. It made people love her, without question. I remember thinking, how do you confront someone like that? You can't. because logic doesn't cure the kind of sickness that craves pity more than oxygen. Still, I had to try. I waited 3 days before she texted again. Just a simple message. Miss you. No apology. No mention of what she'd done. Just 2 words designed to reopen every wound. I didn't reply right away. I just stared at it, wondering how many times she'd sent that same message to other men she'd broken. Then, after hours of pacing, I wrote back, "We need to talk." Her response came instantly. "Of course, but not in person. I'm still too weak. Can we do a call?" That one line almost made me laugh. Even her excuses were recycled when the call connected. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Fragile. Sweet. She talked about how therapy was helping, how the doctors were optimistic, and how she'd been thinking about me every day. It was almost impressive, the way she could slip back into character like nothing had happened. I let her speak for 20 minutes before I said a word. Then I asked quietly, "What was his name?" Silence. "What?" "The man before me. The one in the photos. The one who saved you." The air on the other end changed. I could hear her breathing, slow and careful. Then, finally, she laughed, not nervously, but like she was talking to a child. "You went through my things again, didn't you? That's exactly the kind of behavior the doctor warned me about." And just like that, she flipped the script. In less than a sentence, she made herself the victim again, and me the unstable one. I tried to stay calm. "You lied to me about everything. You never had cancer." Another pause. Then her voice dropped, low and trembling. "You don't understand. I didn't want you to leave. You said you needed a reason to stay, and I gave you one." The world went silent. My throat closed up. "That's what you think love is?" I whispered. "Control?" "No," she said. "Love is survival. And I survived because you loved me." I didn't remember ending the call. I just remember the sound of my own pulse in my ears. After that night, I didn't sleep for almost 2 days. My mind was a loop of her voice, her tears, her twisted logic. And buried somewhere under all that madness, one horrifying truth kept rising to the surface. She still believed it. Every lie she told, every manipulation, every photo, every fake tear, they weren't just tactics. They were her reality. And that's when I realized something far worse than being lied to. She didn't lie to me. She lied through me. I was just the next vessel, the next believer, the next chapter in her endless story of sickness and salvation. But not anymore. I decided I'd find the others, the men before me. Maybe one of them had proof. Maybe together we could finally end her game. Because if I didn't, I already knew how this story would end. Someone else would love her. Someone else would save her. And someone else would die trying. It started with a single name buried deep in an old common thread. Someone had tagged her under a post from 5 years ago. A photo of a man with a caption that read, "Still can't believe she's gone. You didn't deserve this." His name was Eric Mason. There were broken heart emojis, prayers, candles, dozens of people saying how tragic it was that his girlfriend had lost her battle. Only the girlfriend's name was hers. Same face, same smile, same story. I felt sick. I scrolled through every comment, searching for a clue. Someone mentioned a memorial page. I found it easily, still active, with her photo in a banner and a long post written by her family. It said she'd passed away peacefully after a long fight with leukemia. But the date? The death was a year before she met me. That was the first crack in the coffin of her perfect illusion. I contacted one of the people who'd commented, pretending to be a journalist working on a mental health piece. The woman who replied, her name was Heather, said she used to work with Eric. She said he'd been a sweet, lost soul after his girlfriend died, and that he'd taken his own life not long after. He couldn't handle losing her, she wrote. It was heartbreaking. She was his world. I sat staring at those words for hours, my hands trembling on the keyboard. He killed himself. For her. For the same lie. But the part that destroyed me was when I asked for a photo of them together. Heather sent me one, a candid shot of Eric and her sitting in a park, laughing. She was wearing the same necklace she'd worn the first time I told her I loved her, the same one she said her mother gave her before she got sick. That night, I didn't sleep. I poured through every archive I could find, searching for her name in old blogs, charity sites, donation campaigns. And then the pieces began to form a horrifying pattern. Different cities, different diseases, always tragic, always terminal, always perfectly timed. In one place, she was a young widow with lung cancer raising money for treatments that didn't exist. In another, a leukemia survivor who'd lost her fiancé to suicide. Each time, she'd vanished right after the donation stopped, and every time, a man was left behind, grieving, ruined, sometimes dead. There were at least 4 names before mine, for lives that ended in silence. I started to wonder how many people had fallen in love with her before me. How many funerals had she orchestrated with her fake tears and trembling hands? When I couldn't take the guessing anymore, I made a burner account and sent her a message. Just one line. Eric Mason says hello. She replied 3 minutes later. Who is this? You know who. She didn't type for almost 5 minutes. Then came her message. You're sick. You need help. That was rich, coming from her. But I didn't reply. I wanted her to stew in it, the same way she'd made me live in her madness. 2 days later, a black car parked across from my apartment. I noticed it because it stayed there all night, lights off, engine idling. I thought I was imagining things until I saw a flicker of movement, the faint glow of a phone screen. The next morning, I found a note under my windshield. No name, no threats, just 3 words, written in the same delicate handwriting I once found beautiful. Don't dig deeper. I stared at it until the ink started to blur in the sunlight. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise, because that's what she did. Whenever someone got close to the truth, she didn't disappear. She made them disappear. And for the first time since everything began, I felt real fear, not for what she'd done, but for what she might do next. That night, I drove to Eric's hometown, a small place 3 hours away. I found his sister, told her who I was. She didn't believe me at first. No one ever does when you start a sentence with, "The woman your brother died for isn't dead." But then I showed her the messages, the photos, the fake doctor reports. I watched her expression change from confusion to horror to something wordless, the kind of disbelief that cracks inside your chest. She told me something I'll never forget. 2 weeks before Eric's death, he'd told his sister he thought something was wrong, that his girlfriend's illness didn't make sense, that the hospitals never had her name, that she refused to let him meet her family, that she had bruises that didn't look like chemo bruises. He said he was going to confront her. 3 days later, he was found dead in his car. No note. The police ruled it suicide. His sister always thought there was more to it. Now, so did I. When I left her house, she grabbed my wrist and said, "Don't go after her. Please. She doesn't get caught. She just moves." But I couldn't stop. I drove home in silence, her words echoing in my head. She doesn't get caught. And maybe that's why I couldn't sleep that night. Because I realized something else. Maybe she didn't just move. Maybe she followed. Because by the time I pulled into my apartment, that black car was back. Same spot. Same engine idling. Only this time, there was no one inside. Just a phone on the dashboard. Screen lit up, a message open, a draft that said, "I'm sorry. I can't live with what I've done." My blood turned to ice, because it was signed with my name. I didn't even go upstairs. I just sat in my car staring at the glow of my own name typed out in that draft message, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing the ground under you was already gone. She wasn't just playing a story anymore. She was writing mine. All the years of fake diagnoses, Photoshop test results, and whispered, "Please don't leave me," had been rehearsals for this moment. And now, somehow, she had turned me into her next tragedy before I was even dead. I picked up the phone from the dashboard with a tissue like it was a bomb. The screen was still lit. It was my name at the top, my full name. My hands shook as I scrolled. There were other drafts, too. One was an email to my boss about my mental breakdown. Another was a note addressed to my family, apologizing for lying and hurting her. It was everything she'd need to stage a perfect implosion. A depressed man who cracked under guilt, abandoned a sick woman, and ended his own life. I drove all night after that. I didn't even know where I was going. Gas stations, empty highways, cheap coffee. I kept imagining the headlines, the whispers, the way my friends and family would look at each other if she pulled it off. We always thought something was off with him. Poor girl, sick and betrayed. She was building it brick by brick. She had already done it before. Eric, the others. How many notes had she written for them? How many drafts? How many planted whispers? How many memorial posts scheduled before they even disappeared? Around dawn, I stopped at a 24-hour diner and opened my laptop. My fingers felt like lead, but I started pulling every file, every screenshot, every receipt into a single folder. I printed them. Photos, timestamps, bank statements. I wrote out everything I remembered, like a witness try to get a statement on record before it's too late. Because I knew now, if she had my passwords, my laptop, my phone for even an hour, she could erase me the way she erased the others. I sent copies of the folder to 2 friends with no explanation except, if anything happens to me, open this. Then I created a burner email with everything inside and scheduled it to send to a journalist in 30 days if I didn't log in again. By noon, I'd been awake almost 30 hours. My eyes burned, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I stopped thinking like a boyfriend and started thinking like prey. I replayed every time she collapsed, every ambulance that never came, every tear she shed at the perfect moment. She didn't improvise. She planned. And that meant somewhere there was a plan for me, too. That night, when I finally went back to my apartment, the black car was gone. The street looked normal. The world looked normal. Inside, everything was exactly as I left it, except for one thing. On my kitchen table, in the middle of a neat square of light from the lamp, was a box wrapped in brown paper. No return address. My name written in her handwriting. I stared at it for a long time. My heart hammered, so hard it hurt. I didn't touch it. I just sat down across from it, like it was a living thing. Eventually, I used scissors to slice the tape, careful not to smudge anything. Inside was a single item, my necklace, the one she had given me on our anniversary, the one she said her grandmother had blessed for protection. Only now it was broken, the chain snapped clean in half. There was a note folded under it. No greeting, no signature, just a sentence. They all thought they could leave. I don't remember the next few minutes. I just remember my phone vibrating in my pocket, a new message from an unknown number. It was a photo, grainy, taken from a distance. Me, sitting at my own kitchen table staring at the box. Another text, "You're next." That was when something inside me finally shifted. Not panic, not despair. Something harder. A part of me that had been trying to save her, understand her, forgive her. It burned out. All that was left was cold clarity. I called Eric's sister, told her everything. She started crying and said she'd been waiting for someone to call. She gave me the number of another man's brother, someone she'd met through a support group, another survivor of the same woman. We spoke for hours. The stories matched like puzzle pieces. The illnesses, the disappearances, the stage breakdowns. We weren't just victims. We were witnesses to a pattern. By midnight, there were 5 of us on a group call. All men, all broken, all still alive. Somehow, we compared notes, screenshots, documents. And in that call, something formed, not just outrage, but strategy. We realized we had enough to prove at least one fraud case, maybe more. We could bring it to the police, the press, someone who wouldn't look away this time. But as we talked, I kept glancing at my window. I half expected to see that black car again, the glow of a phone screen. Nothing, just empty streetlights. When the call ended, one of the men said quietly, "Be careful. She doesn't just lie. She erases." I sat in the dark, the necklace still in its box, and thought about the note. They all thought they could leave. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Because I wasn't trying to leave. I was trying to finish the story before she wrote the ending. I called him at 5 in the morning, Jake, the one who said he never thought he'd get involved with me again after everything. He answered right away, quietly, like someone used to hiding. We agreed to meet in a garage at the back of town, where patrols never stop and where you can talk without fear someone's listening. By the time I arrived, we already had names, dates, places, everything the police lacked. Copies of checks, archived photos, call logs that matched her collapses, confirmations from clinics that had never seen her as a patient. We'd pieced the evidence together like a mosaic. Each fragment fit into the pattern of malice she had been composing for years. The first plan was simple and brutal. Force her to reveal the face behind the mask. Make her speak in a way she never had. Without a prepared tear, without a phone witness, without a camera crew. We had to bring her out live or make her meet someone she couldn't control. But she wasn't stupid. She never acted without a backup script. We knew that. That's why the next step required caution and cunning like a chess match. We had to make her make a mistake. We created a fake profile, not a crude clone, but a three-dimensional trap. A woman volunteer from a support group who, knowing her story, would act as a compassionate friend and accidentally organize a meeting at a public event. We circulated invitations to a bogus fundraising campaign, enlisted a few relatives who would believe the right narrative, and for safety arranged a local journalist, someone who could be bought not with money but with the scoop of a lifetime, an exclusive he would crave. Everything had to look natural. Nothing is worse than a setup that smells fake. That day she came in her favorite scarf, with that same expression she wore before every big performance. Slightly distant, slightly broken, with that ragged soul we remember from her profiles. She didn't know the room held several of our people, the same ones who'd lost everything because of her. They sat quietly like an audience at the final act. When the discussion moved to collecting funds, she spoke. Soft voice, watery eyes. Some people in the room even cried. She was brilliant in her simplicity. A few prepared lines, a couple of cliched pauses, and the whole hall was in her hand. But we were waiting for something else, a moment when she would slip. And she slipped, not from nerves, but by misstating a fact, some small detail that could be checked in seconds. The name of a clinic, a date of a visit, the name of a medication. One of us raised a hand and asked casually, as if nothing. Did you say the treatment was in August last year? I have a record. Maybe we can find you in the list? Her hands trembled. She averted her eyes. A microscopic flash of panic crossed her face, the first thin crack in her flawless costume of stories. After the meeting, the journalist came up to me and whispered that they were intrigued by the small inconsistency. Small enough to seem like curiosity, but enough to start a check. We thought the game was won. There was a feeling that we had finally found a key that would open all other doors. But she was already one step ahead. That same evening, my friend started getting anonymous SMS messages. Fragments of old private conversations, ripped out of context and assembled to look like threats. Uniquely, she knew where those files were stored, knew passwords of old accounts I had thought deleted. Someone posted photos from my phone, scenes that looked like proof of my instability. The next morning, I was called into the office where my boss looked at me with the eyes of someone who no longer knew what to think. At the same time, the invited journalist said his editor had received a letter that would justify a big scandal. A wealthy businessman threatens a vulnerable woman, right? I felt the ground melting under my feet. We prepared for an attack, but not for her using not only our weaknesses but our history against us. Her trick was simple. She turned every attempt to expose her into a new scene in which she was the injured party and we were the persecutors. She could fill human compassion with such force that all traces of the lies seemed not worth tearing open. And then I realized our trap needed a different plan. Not expose here and now. We had to create a safe setting where her reaction would be recorded not as theater, but as evidence. We changed tactics. Instead of a loud public reveal, we began working with the law. But differently. We found a lawyer who wasn't afraid of messy cases. A person who knew that evidence isn't drama, but a line of facts. We brought him into the same support group where the victim sat and showed him a stack of documents that, when placed together, looked like a criminal pattern. Forged receipts, fake statements, the same letter templates with oddly altered fonts. The lawyer said one thing. We needed to make her sign a signature on paper. She never left signatures where they couldn't be tampered with later, but she did leave them in small places. Donation forms, letters to donors. If we could find her real signature and compare it to those she left in various temporary contracts, that would be an iron key. At the same time, we started working with psychologists who agreed to testify about her manipulations as a series of behavioral patterns. We recorded interviews with ex-boyfriends, friends, everyone willing to testify, and we didn't ask them to speak about emotions, only facts, dates, places, calls, receipts. We made the bureaucratic routine she hated, because bureaucracy is like light that illuminates tiny details where you can't fake the sheen of a tear. And yet, when we finally felt ready, she struck first. The night we were to submit the first packet to the investigators, I arrived at the lawyer's office expecting police staff. There was a knock at the door. It wasn't police. It was two people with badges from some private investigative agency. We had never authorized access to our case. They stood in the corridor with photos showing me on the street with someone who seemed suspiciously unfamiliar to me, and said they'd received testimony about my involvement in a fraud. Someone had planted materials that looked like internal evidence, forged bank statements, SMS where I supposedly make threats. They were neatly fabricated to create the impression that one of us was actually planning a real scam. It turned out she knew where our copies were kept and how to substitute them before we filed. That evening I realized she wasn't just skilled at forging documents. She was a master of emphasis. She aimed not at us, but at the system we lived in. She could make those who had the power to check facts doubt, and that put us at a disadvantage. And the police? They did what police do. Follow protocol. But the protocol was for people who trust facts on paper, not for the context of life. So we went another route. We didn't attack head-on. We dismantled her network from the inside. We found a person who had access to her donors' accounts, the secretary of one of her charities, and persuaded her to quietly hand over a list of transactions. There were small payments, but more interesting were the repeats. Small sums, then larger, with the same periodicity during every treatment wave. We found an account through which significant sums flowed, but not in her name. It belonged to a legal entity registered to another person she used as a front. Behind each such front was a small shell company. The owner turned out to be someone who had long since left the country. And then we saw what she hadn't planned, a trail and a mistake in the form of a person who never really disappeared, an accountant at the firm who kept a copy of all records on his personal drive. He agreed to help after receiving threats, and that was our chance. Whoever was behind her was big but human, and people make mistakes. We compiled the materials. When we finally came to the investigator's office with all those details, signatures, bank extracts, testimonies, the police weren't thrilled but couldn't ignore them. We saw her broad smile on the group photo tighten. She knew that games end as specifics appear. And then what I feared happened. She didn't run. She did what she always did in her darkest role. She staged a death. One morning Jake called. They found Eric. At first I didn't understand who he meant. Then there was silence in his voice. His words barely formed. She called the police this morning. Said she saw me near her house. There was a note. Everything like I was the one. We ran to the spot, but it was too late. They found another note. The same script, the same pattern. Angry messages, forged files, a virtual conversation where I supposedly promised to deal with things. She stitched the fabric masterfully, and in it there were no holes. Here was the cruelty. She didn't kill directly. She skillfully created situations in which people killed themselves, or the system made them into the villains in her stories. She did it so that the traces pointed to us. She didn't want police hunting her. She wanted them hunting us. And when they did, she sat beside them and cried for the cameras. I stood on the threshold of her apartment, watching an officer escort me aside, feeling something cold spread through me, total, silent exhaustion. We had evidence that now seemed fragile against her expertise. But I remembered one thing. With every new construction, she left some trace, a signature, a photo, a receipt, some tiny detail exposing the artificiality. Those tiny details we began to methodically burn away, until what I couldn't imagine earlier happened. Not she broke, but the system meant to protect began to pay attention. Did we win? No. She slipped out again and again. She cried on camera and waited for our exhaustion. But we didn't step back. And that night, when a small piece of truth, a bank account she hadn't expected to surface, made it into daylight, I realized the war was only beginning. She could prepare my death, write my farewell, but if we acted smarter, if we didn't let her set the format, if we shone the light where needed, we would break her games more than once, and so that others would see. I lay down to sleep at 3 a.m, and the thought carrying me into dreams wasn't about survival. It was about how many people still didn't know the truth. I realized with a terrible clarity. I no longer wanted to be just a witness. I wanted to be the one who closed this rotten show once and for all. I thought the hardest part was finding the pieces. I was wrong. The hardest part was picking them up without becoming one of them. After the raid on the accountant's files, we had momentum. For the first time in months, the air smelled like possibility instead of smoke. We had transaction trails, copies of fake invoices, names of shell companies, and most importantly, witnesses willing to speak. Jake and I worked like men who had been given back a map of purpose. We met every night in that cold garage and stitched the paper together until the picture stopped feeling like madness and started feeling like evidence. We built a dossier so dense the edges cut. It had receipts with matching handwriting, bank transfers routed to a charity incorporated under a front name, emails with headers forged out of temp accounts, and, embedded like a razor, photos of her in hospitals from years before, dated and watermarked in ways that exposed their artifice. We had recordings from the fundraiser where she misnamed a clinic. We had testimony from exes who remembered small lies she'd told that now looked like rehearsed lines. We had a psychologist report explaining the pattern of histrionic tactics, the way certain people weaponize sympathy to control and erase. We decided not to go to the police with everything at once. The police had protocols and paper, and a willingness to be fair only when a case fit inside their boxes. Instead, we took a two-pronged approach. Legal pressure to freeze the accounts and public pressure to break the narrative she controlled. We hired a lawyer who smelled of old courtroom air and quiet rage. He understood that you don't defeat someone like her with outrage. You defeat them by turning their theater into testimony. Our lawyer filed a civil suit that forced disclosure. He subpoenaed bank records, domain registrations, donor lists. The motions were boring and wonderful. The kind of legal minutiae that will choke a manipulator because it insists on facts where she relied on feelings. Meanwhile, we cultivated one reporter who still believed in truth more than traffic. He held the promise of a long peace. He wanted more than scandal. He wanted a thread the public could follow, a rope to pull her down. She knew. She had to. You don't run a long con for years without a radar for threat. The night before the lawyer served the subpoenas, her PR person, yes, she had one. People like her always do. Sent an anonymous email to the reporter with a file. It was a curated character assassination. Intimate screenshots, edited audio, collage of our worst moments framed as proof we were stalking and harassing her. She had people who could fabricate believable things, and she had people ready to deliver them. When the story I thought would expose her instead hit the paper, it was different from what I imagined. The reporter ran a careful piece, balanced, full of documents, but was framed as a question. Was the charity legitimate? The headline tempered sympathy with skepticism, but the industry is messy. Passions flare and nuance gets lost. Her team swung fast. A press conference with a doctor from a reputable hospital who, for reasons that would later smell like favors and invoices, vouched for her as a chronic patient. Online, she curated sorrow. She posted videos of trembling hands, of hospital rooms, edited and arranged to maximize empathy. The comments flashed with hearts and stay strong, and within 48 hours the momentum began to shift. That was a lesson that cut deepest. Facts are slow. Empathy is instantaneous. She knew how to make people feel before they could think. She built a machinery that turned doubt into outrage at the doubter. When people had to choose between believing a fevered, crying woman or a stack of spreadsheets, most chose the woman. Every step forward we took, she countered by making us appear monstrous. A fake email here, a doctored voice note there, and suddenly our faces were in message threads we never typed. Friends I trusted asked questions. My employer called another one of those welfare checks, and I watched as a career I'd assumed was safe started to wobble. She never had to win the fight. She only had to corrupt the frame through which the fight would be seen. We doubled down. The lawyer pushed for a judge to approve forensic audits. He wanted subpoenas to 3 hosting services for IP addresses tied to her site and social accounts. The forensics team did their work in dark rooms, running traces that moved like slow lightning. They found a cluster of disposable emails and VPN endpoints. Clumsy at times, but at other moments terribly sophisticated. Then they found a slip. One of the shell companies had paid a freelancer, and that freelancer had used the same credit card years earlier for a domain registration connected to a personal account with a name. The name led to a woman who lived in a town 2 hours away. She answered the phone like she had nothing to hide until we told her what the documents showed. Her voice changed. "I'm just an assistant," she whispered. She told me it was for charity. She had receipts and bank transfers, and best of all, she kept copies of instructions from the boss. That boss was her only real connection to the financial seam we were tugging at. We were close, dangerously close, the kind of close that made you taste metal. And then she did what she always did. She turned the world toward human consequence and away from ledger columns. It happened on a Tuesday morning, a day that will live like a stain. I was at the civil court waiting room, the lawyer whispering to the clerk about gag orders, when my phone pinged with a video. It was grainy and short, but it was the worst kind. My face, my voice, edited into a montage with music, overlaid with text that accused me of stalking, of coercion, of threats. It was on every channel within an hour. The message under it read, "He tried to buy my silence. He terrorized me. He wanted me gone." People who had once agreed to meet us now sent messages that read like condolences. Lawsuits erupted like mushrooms. My inbox filled with legal threats. The lawyer swore and ran new motions, but every motion required us to speak, to produce, to explain. Speaking is what she trained to weaponize. Detachment and silence were our only shields, and silence became impossible when the world wanted answer after answer. She had not only hijacked the narrative, she'd leased the microphones. That night someone left a bouquet at my door with a card signed by a name I didn't recognize. The petals were yellow, staged to look apologetic. The card read, "We stand with survivors. We see you." My mother called and cried. My sister, who once defended me without question, asked if I was sure I wasn't, if maybe I'd missed something. It was an erosion, small grains of doubt, internalization, and then collapse. We had one gambit left, a live deposition. The lawyer argued that under oath, in front of the court stenographer, she could not maintain a manufactured persona. Public, legal, recorded, these were contexts less easily staged. He moved to compel her to testify, under oath, about the charity's finances. If she lied, perjury was a crime. If she lied in affidavit, it would be on record. It was brutal, but it was the kind of brutal she might not be able to script. She countersued. She filed a restraining order against me, alleging harassment. She petitioned for emergency measures and got them. The judge, overwhelmed by pages of paper from both sides and a streak of public outrage that ran like oil over the case, ordered a temporary injunction. She could not be forced to appear without extraordinary cause. The court sided with the immediate harm claim because our allegations were still, in many ways, about intent and pattern, things that required time to prove. We tried a different angle then. A sting. One of the men from the group, quiet, patient, someone who had lost a job and family, volunteered to be bait. He would donate a small, traceable sum to a new charity effort and request a receipt in his name. If she reacted, if she called him, if she tried to shepherd him into an exclusive meeting, that meeting would be recorded. He would wear a body camera. We would bring the journalist, the lawyer, the psychologist, everyone we could, to watch her slip. The night before the sting, we met to go over details. We'd rehearse the script, check the legal boundaries, arrange secure channels. There was a brittle optimism in the room, the kind a man has before cliff jumping. We believed in the pattern, in the math of her lies, in the paper trail. We believed in the sum of our evidence. She didn't take the bait. At least, not in a way we could use. The donors we'd gifted with leads began receiving calls from her. She sent messages, tender, intimate, apology-heavy, to the volunteer. When he wouldn't reply, she escalated. Private investigator in the neighborhood, a friendly neighbor popping and asking about his welfare. A phone call that implied his child's school had called. The volunteer wavered and then retreated. You could see it in his eyes when he came back to the garage the next day. He had not been strong enough to withstand the pressure. He had not wanted to be the one whose life was upended because of a cause. It was then I understood the shape of her weapon. It wasn't always a public theater. Sometimes it was patient attrition. It was a silent dismantling of structures that would defend you. Friends, work, custody of kids, credit, mental health. She used the law, the press, and the human capacity for empathy as elements of a slow, precise destruction. We lost ground. We lost volunteers. We lost a reporter when his editor got a better offer and pulled back. Our lawyer warned that if we continued, we would be bleeding money and lives. It was a strange war where every victory demanded a price we could not always pay. I sat up for nights measuring what we had left. The dossiers were heavy on my shelves, the emails unread, the receipts stacked like small bones. I kept thinking about Eric, about the parking lot, the note. I kept thinking of the black car, and the way the world looks when it decides to believe a beautiful lie. And then, in a mailbox 3 towns over, a letter arrived for me with no return address. It contained a single photograph, hers, earlier, young and laughing with a man I'd never seen, his arm over her shoulders, a caption typed at the bottom. She thanked me for the chemo I stopped. The handwriting on the back read, simply, "Some stories are not meant to be told." That night, I burned nothing. I made copies instead. I scanned everything and sent duplicates to 3 people who had promised to never let the story die if anything happened to me. I told them not to trust journalists. I told them to trust the records. I've learned that some monsters are bureaucratic, not mythic. They do not move in shadows, but in forms and receipts, in the slow glide of a pen across a page. They do not shout. They whisper and then watch the world echo the whisper. We did not stop her. Not yet. But we learned to play a new game. Patience, redundancy, public records, and the stubborn accumulation of small, undeniable facts. We learned to protect the men who came forward, to rotate bait, to guard against attrition. We learned that exposure could come from 100 small lights instead of a single blinding spotlight. I am tired. I am scarred. I am still walking through the adverts and the obituaries she leaves in her wake. But I am not finished. The ledger grows. The list lengthens. People keep finding me quietly. Messages from men in other cities, women who think they might have been used, an accountant who can't sleep at night and wants to talk. There's a long way to go. The law is slow. The press is fickle. The things that make her powerful also make her fragile. She thrives on being witnessed and believed. If we can slowly change who bears witness, if we can teach even a few more people to look at paperwork the way we look at them now, suspicious, patient, relentless, then perhaps the pattern will end. Tonight, as I type, the black car is not outside my window. My hands are steady enough to write. The necklace she sent, the torn chain she left as a message, sits in a drawer. I keep my copies in 3 separate places. I sleep in shifts, and I still dream of fluorescent hospital lights and the sound of her voice saying, "You'll never learn." This war is longer than I imagined. It is quieter and crueler. It will demand more strategy, more allies, more iron patience. And yet there's a stubbornness in me now that was not there before, a recognition that a person who makes a career of feigning death can only thrive as long as people are willing to believe the show. So we continue. We gather. We prepare. We wait for the small errors that time and care reveal. We file motions and keep copies and teach men how to survive being smeared. We learn not to rush the reveal, but to craft it into something that cannot be unmade by a single well-placed hair. There's a truth I hold close. Monsters who feed on empathy forget that empathy can be taught to ask questions. They forget that the same human tenderness they weaponize can, if steeled with skepticism, be the blade that cuts their strings. We are learning to sharpen that blade. I woke up to silence. Not the comforting kind, but the kind that makes you feel like the world has already decided something without telling you. My phone was vibrating across the table. A dozen missed calls, then one message from Jake. "Turn on the news." The headline hit like a blade. Charity found her hospitalized after alleged breakdown. Accusations prove false. The article was pure theater. She was recovering from trauma inflicted by an organized smear campaign. They mentioned me by name. Former partner under investigation for defamation. It was written like a eulogy for my sanity. She had done it again. Turned her exposure into a rebirth. Transformed every lie into a tragic encore. She had even faked a suicide note this time. Handwritten, shaky, soaked in tears, describing me as a reason she couldn't live with the pain anymore. The world didn't question it. The sympathy was instant, bottomless, and absolute. Donations doubled overnight. Her face was everywhere. Pale, fragile, framed by flowers. Survivor silenced by cruelty. I could practically hear her laughing behind the morphine mask. I drove to the hospital. Jake begged me not to, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to see her, to look into those eyes and know if she still remembered what she'd done. I bribed a nurse to let me into the ward. She was sitting up in bed, no IVs, no monitors, just her, calm, perfectly composed, her eyes sharp and bright. When she saw me, she smiled. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, her voice like a lullaby for the damned. I asked her why. Why do all of this? The fake illness, the fundraisers, the bodies left behind. She tilted her head, still smiling. "Because people like me don't survive by being good," she whispered. "We survive by being believed." I told her it was over, that we had evidence, witnesses, records. She leaned closer, her smile deepening. "Then why am I the one in white?" she asked. "And you the one outside the door?" The security guard appeared seconds later, pulling me away. She didn't resist. She just watched, calm, radiant, triumphant. As they dragged me out, she lifted a finger to her lips, like a promise of silence. 2 days later, my lawyer called. The investigator handling our case was suspended. The accountant who agreed to testify had withdrawn. The folder with the final signatures, gone. The server backups we'd made, corrupted. Every trail we had burned clean. And then a letter arrived. No name, no address. Just one sentence written in her hand. The truth only matters when someone cares to remember it. I sat there for a long time, the letter shaking my hands. She was still out there, untouchable, adored, untamed. The charity was already rebranded under a new name, a new cause. People were donating again. The same cycle with new victims. But not all was lost. Jake had made copies, hidden ones, buried under encrypted drives, impossible to erase. Somewhere, out there, the real story still existed. The one she couldn't bury beneath her crocodile tears. So maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is just a pause before the real ending. Because monsters like her don't stop until someone makes them. And if the world keeps believing her, then maybe it needs to hear the story from the only man who saw the truth behind the smile. So I'll keep talking. Not for revenge. Not even for justice. But because she's still out there, writing her next script, playing her next victim. And someone needs to be there when the mask finally cracks. Someone who remembers.